So here I have the componentry back from the ultrasonic cleaner. They've all been dried now, and this is all ready to start reassembling the body. I'll sort these out so that I can find the parts I want when I want them, and I'll go through the reassembly stage by stage. I'm going to start the reassembly of the camera body here by reassembling the rangefinder coupling and so forth. So first of all, I need to put back this spring that I've removed from the camera for safekeeping earlier in the piece. Let's see if I can get this back in place. Goes over this boss. And all it does is pre-tension this arm to pull it forward. We have the baffle here. We've got two pieces here. We've got a metal piece and a plastic piece. Now, the metal piece, one of the top arms on it here has got a notch in it. If you look at your plastic piece here, you'll quite possibly see that the notch, the arm, has left a unscratched part in here. It fits like that. This component only fits in the body one way, so pull the arm forward, fit it into place. Now, quite likely that metal piece of baffle has dropped out of place there, but that doesn't matter for our purposes. It's still going to be good enough. So, we need our arm for the rangefinder, and on that I have two tiny washers, top and bottom. I'll just position them there where I can find them. One of these has been through the cleaner, the other one has not, so the clean one's very hard to pick up. We have three screws that hold this top piece in place. First of all, here's our transfer shaft. This is what transfers the action from the cocking rack working at the back of the camera through to the front of the camera where it can cock the shutter. So I'm going to apply some synthetic grease here. Now the side that's going in here is the side with the disc on it, or retainer, the washer. That rack can go into the body and fit into the socket at the back there, like that. Our rangefinder arm. For ease of assembly, I'm going to put a tiny bit of grease on those pins, top and bottom, because that'll hold my washers in place. There's two tiny washers, top and bottom. There they are. They're held in place on that grease. This arm. This arm goes into the body, and there's a little hole, just like on this top piece. There's a little hole down here. That arm has to go into that little hole. That's the pivot point for the bottom. At the top we have a pivot point in this plate. So we need to get that plate over the pin, and then I can swing this piece into the body. This piece is held in with 3 screws. They're countersunk screws, like same as the ones they use to hold components at the base of the camera, except these ones will be clean because they've never been covered in glue or grease. Don't do them up tight until all 3 are in position. And you've checked that the arm moves freely and your transfer shaft is now trapped behind there. It can't fall out. I'll do those 3 screws up. If you're a bit paranoid, you could put a spot of lacquer on those 3 screws if you like, but I've never known them to be found to be loose. Certainly not often enough to worry about. Right, what do we got here? If we flip back our rangefinder cam, this piece here, which shifts the frames, can fall back forward. Now I'm going to put a little smear of molybdenum down both sides of this tab here where it runs in, and that's just so that that piece can move smoothly. Drop our rangefinder coupling back down, that'll just sit there. That's happy. That's all that's required at that point. You'll note that I don't have the chrome trim ring on the top of the camera. That allows all this arm to fall forward, and so you've got good clearance. And that's the first stage. The second stage is to get our lock lever and release lever back in the body. Our release lever, which is this one, has to have a spring fitted to it, which I'd removed for safekeeping while I had the parts in the cleaner. So I have to get that back fitted to the lever. That's good. It fits round the stud here. The end of it hooks round underneath the base of it there. Make sure that it's all nice and flat, that it falls neatly into the groove. Pop that to one side. Molybdenum paste. You can use synthetic grease, you could use graphite grease, you could use a lot here. So in this hole at the top of the casting, I'm just rubbing a little bit in there and there, very little, just to make it enough to make a dirty mark. The same at the bottom of the camera. This position here, run some into there, and on this face, because the spring on that release lever will run up and down in the slot at that point, as you'll see shortly. Alright, so the lubrication's in place. We can put our lock lever in place. The lock lever locks the film advance once you reach frame number 1 on your counter. So we fit its return spring. There are 2 springs that look much the same. The lighter of the 2 goes on here. I'm holding the spring down with my thumb and I'm putting the retainer clip in place. C-clip or C-clip or E-clip, whatever you want to call it. And that lever moves freely in the body, which is all we need it to do. Our release lever, its job is to meter the film advance lever, if you like, so that it can only move forward when you're advancing the film, and it can only move back again to the park position once the frame has been fully advanced. The spring goes on the top and its screw goes in at the top. Now the screw is an adjustment screw. This is used to adjust the point at which the film release, that the lock lever releases the film advance to allow you to wind on to the next shot, and the adjustment is used to make sure that it releases the film advance at the same point it fires the shutter. Saves you winding on and ending up with blank frames or otherwise. Now I noticed that this seems to be very loose in there, so I'm just going to take that back out. If it's very loose, it means that it won't retain its adjustment. This is normally crushed slightly to grip that screw a bit firmer. And it's gripping it, but it's not enough to make sure that that's going to stay where it's put. I'm just going to squeeze that in a little bit more. And I did that with the tweezers, not with a pair of pliers. And check the feel of that. That's a bit more secure. That's good. I need a fair bit of friction there so that it stays where it's put. If it's loose, it will end up losing its adjustment over time. Back where we were. Get its return spring on the top. This return spring is heavier than the spring on the lock lever. That'll do nicely. So that's our lock lever and our release lever fitted in the body correctly. Now we can fit some more of the film advance components. And I'll start with the film advance shaft. The film advance shaft needs to be lubricated. And I haven't got the right grease in front of me. We'll start with the film advance shaft. And here I have some graphite grease. So I'll pull back the collar from the shaft at the base. Work a bit of graphite grease onto that shaft. Work that collar on the shaft with my fingers there. Pull back the spring, apply some above the collar. Make sure that's worked in. And I'll apply a bit to the spring. You don't need to go overboard doing that. That's all that's required. Now I'll use some of my synthetic grease here and apply it to the ratchet surfaces on the lever, both ratchets, the one at the top and the bottom. This is the bottom, this is the top. That's all that's required. Now I'll just rotate that round to line up the holes, because I've got to fit my mounting screws through there. And that's about as far as it wants to go, I think. Oh, we can go around the other way a bit. There. I've put my tweezers through there to keep those holes aligned. And I need to fit this into the body. Our lock lever I can pull up and swing to one side. Our release lever I will swing to one side. Oops, I haven't got my sprocket. Here we've got the take-up spool with its bush in place. That should have been in the body ready to go. The bush goes to the bottom of the camera. You can drop that shaft into place. And I see that I need to tension that base up slightly so that it'll hold a little bit of forward tension on it, and I'll just check which way I've got to move that. That's me. 3 screws. As soon as one's in, that's going to hold everything in place. 2 more screws. Put them in place loosely, one at a time. When all 3 are fitted and seated, you can tighten them up. 1, 2, 3. That's all that's required at the base of the camera for the moment. Turn our attention to the top of the camera. Just opening the back of the camera there. Checking that the spool is seated down firmly there as it is. The clutch, I need to assemble the clutch. And the clutch I have found to work best with some graphite grease in it. It gives me the controlled slippage that I like. So I'll apply some to the inside of this barrel, a complete layer all the way around the inside. And this spring has got a tab visible here, which engages with a notch here. And we need to get this quite open spring closed up so that we can fit the drum over it. So I'm using some circlip pliers to hold that. I'll rotate that until the spring is held in, pulled in around there, and I can put the drum over the top. Slip my pliers away from the bottom, and there I have it. The inner and outer component with the spring between them, and we have controlled slippage at this point. That's absolutely essential. It's always smoother in action in one direction than the other. Don't be concerned about that. The direction that it slips in smoothly is the direction we want it to slip. I'm going to apply some synthetic grease to the inside where it runs around the shaft. It can be dropped in to the top of our film advance shaft and rotated until it picks up the slots in the take-up spool. Just a bit of thread there, I'll get rid of that. Here we have the bush that holds the advanced shaft in at the top of the camera. And this gear through here, which doesn't come apart, needs to be lubricated. I've put a good sized daub of synthetic grease on there and I'm forcing that in with my thumb. A bit like packing bearings, if you've ever packed bearings and wheel bearings on old cars. Basically you are creating localised hydraulic pressure which forces that grease in. That's good. I'll put a quick wipe around the inside of the centre, bring back the body. This should drop over the shaft, and if you rotate the sprocket, the take up spool with your thumb, that'll just drop on. You can see it, the gear here rotating as I roll that sprocket backwards and forwards. This component. So we have a plain screw over here at this side. I'm not doing that screw up tight, leaving that loose at the moment. We have a bush. That should be plain side up. It's very slightly countersunk on one side. It should be plain side up. We have this little anti-backup pull which goes on in that direction, and the screw here that goes through the lot. So I'll run that screw up, check that that's all moving freely. I'm not doing that screw up tight, I've just pulled it up. I'll zoom you in a bit. You can see the position that that pawl is sitting. I've got to fit its return spring. The spring is doing what springs normally do, doing its best to get away. And the short end of the spring should be hooked between the pawl and the body over here, like that, so that the pawl is sprung loaded to return it in this direction. I'm going to turn the camera back over. This component, I'll zoom you back out, I'm losing things here. This component is the lock lever for the rewind button. I want to put a bit of molybdenum paste around the rounded end. I'll put some through the screw hole for good measure. That fits in at the base of the camera. underneath the lock lever like that. The lever has a return spring which drops in there, and a screw with two shoulders that retains the lever and the spring. Before you tighten it right up, check that it has centered itself on the lever so the lever is free to swing. Now I've got to hook the end of the spring here back over this side of the lever. Like that. Check that that lever pulls back out of the way. It does. I've just popped my spring loose doing that. Don't do that. Yeah, that's good. Right. Now our sprocket shaft can go in the sprocket. So I'll take the sprocket shaft, apply some synthetic grease to the top portion of the shaft, the bottom portion of the shaft, and a little bit to the gear teeth themselves. The sprocket shaft goes in here, and our sprocket goes in here with the slot to the top. The shaft should go right through. If you pull back that rewind catch lock and keep some pressure on the top of that shaft, it should pop all the way through into position. I'm revolving the spool here to bring the hole, screw hole in the shaft there directly in line with the slot in that sprocket, and the screw, which fortunately I could lay my hands on straight away, is here. Want to run that screw in, and nip it up tight. We need to put the rewind button on now. We've got the return spring for the rewind button, the rewind button, and its washer. I'll apply some synthetic grease to the return spring. Pop the return spring on the shaft of the rewind button. Put the washer on that shaft, and holding my finger on the top of that shaft, screw that into the bottom of the shaft. If you do this correctly, the button can be depressed, and now it just needs to be tightened up. Since I don't have the other spanner with me, I'll cheat and I'll use this, and I'll just hold the sprocket with my thumb and just turn that with the pliers until it is uncomfortable. Now I know that's more than good and tight enough. So there we have the components at the base of the camera all in place. We can carry on with the upper Film Advanced components. Start with this main drive wheel here. I'm running some synthetic grease around the inside edge and around the centre. Rotating this anti-clockwise, it'll push the pawl out of the way and drop into place. And there I've just aligned the shaft forward and aft. This spring, it's disc shaped, edges upwards. I put some grease on that, not because it needs to be greasy, but to protect it from rust. Glad that drive dog components in place, and the washer. And the drive gear for the cocking rack. And the screw that holds it all together. I'll see if I can get that started without disturbing the position of that gear, which must stay on the square. It's got to be aligned with the squared end of the shaft. Just run it up very lightly with my tweezers. That's good. Now I can find the appropriate screwdriver for that. Check that my lock lever is in place. Put my special screwdriver on the top. Do that up snug. Check that that all looks good. Looks a bit tight, something wrong. Something's not sitting correctly. That's better, it just drops into place. Check what happens as I revolve the take-up spool. You'll see that that pushes past there quite nicely. That's good. Now our two screws here and here, they can be done up. So I'll nip those up tight. Check that there's no undue resistance here. If the shaft has been pushed too far this way, you'll get binding in the gear here. It'll feel quite tight. That feels fine. That's all good. So, what can we do next? I think I want the chrome trim for the top of the camera, really. I better go and find it.